Hello and welcome back to the Free Outside podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Garmeyer, and when you listen to this, well, if scheduling software works and if you listen to it the moment that it comes out, then I will be running a 100-mile race, the Wasatch 100. I've probably talked about it way too much on here, but that drives the episode we're going to have. Okay, but first, I need your help. We are hosting a race, Montana Meltdown, October 12th to 13th, and you guys should sign up. There's a 4-hour option, 12-hour option, 24-hour option. Great chance, great time of year. Perfect weather to push yourself, see how far you can go. So sign up at the link down below. Okay, now the episode. Today we have on Joe Corcione, who is a running coach, an athlete, a podcaster, a business owner, all the things. Super knowledgeable, super good conversation. The guy knows his stuff. And he knows how to talk and say his stuff. So we do a unique type of episode, and let's just get into that because it's time to learn about what happens in a 100-mile race. Let's go. All right, today we have Joe Corcione, and not only is he an all-star running coach, but he currently has a 50K, a 100-miler, a 300-miler, and a 200-miler on his schedule to run. So somehow he balances a full-time coaching schedule on top of being a top podcaster as well as an athlete himself. So today, welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Oh, Jeff, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. And hey, dude, I've just been so honored and just blessed to have you as a friend over the past few years, and always look to you for like inspiration as I dive into these longer events, man. So it's I always get to love chatting with you, and it's an honor to be here, man. So I appreciate you having me on.
I mean, of course, it's the honor's all mine. I love your podcast, and I think it gets more people into ultra running the right way than even David Goggins. So there you go.
That's an honor.
But I guess before we get into the initial plan, on that note, I do really love watching all your races, no matter if they go well or not, because you stick them out. And that's unlike a lot of other people who are signed up in that elite field, is you really seek to find something out there. And maybe it's that perfect race or top 10 at Javelina, or maybe it's like a death march for 2 days or 3 days or something, but you get it done either way. And I really respect that, because you start something, and unless something goes drastically wrong, the goal is always to finish it.
Oh, thanks for saying that, man. I appreciate it. And hey, it's, same goes to you, man. I remember at Javelina last year, like one of like my favorite memories was like seeing you on the last loop, and you and I mean, we both had very similar loop fives, like where we just had to gut it out at the end. And I just remember like seeing you out there, and you were just like, you're amazing, dude. And I was like right back at you. And like, it was just so cool because you and I, like, we both went in there with big goals and ambitions and wanted to duke it out. And, I respect you saying that too, just because, for me, I've always thought like, I think there's such value in finishing a race, even when it doesn't go your way, because it solidifies a belief. It's like, if I'm going to do something, like, at least let me get the baseline thing done. Right.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, like Javelina the past 2 years, I wanted to get a golden ticket, but like in the end of the day, like I knew that if I at least finished that thing, even if it didn't go that way, like you still have that fight in you, right? Like you still got that dog in you, as some of the Gen Zers would say today. But I don't know. I feel like that has always, like, even though, I've had many races that didn't go as I wanted to plan, but it's like, okay, at least if I go out and finish this thing, I know that there's still fight in me, and I know that there's still this resilience in me to keep kind of going. Because I always thought, like, even somewhere recently they said, like, well, like, if you go for Javelina this year, you finished it twice, like, are you still going to finish the race even if you're far from your goal? And I was like, 100% yes, because like I just want to know that I can still keep going when crap doesn't go my way. And I think that's just been a very pivotal thing that has me keep showing up even when I get punched in the face many times out there.
Yeah, totally. And if I had quit, I guess I had 4 good loops and then one atrocious one. And if I hadn't kept going to get that last one done, I wouldn't have the story of laying literally on the trail in my own puke, and Courtney and her mom, Courtney DeWalter and her mom, stepping over me, and Courtney being like, it's all right, you got this, you can do it. And it's like, internally, I'm like, I know I can, but it just looks really bad. Okay, I'll probably catch you guys later. Just leave me alone.
But to have that from Courtney too is like amazing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all those little things out there, and get to be a part of when they do the one loop and they all party the whole way. I forget what that's called, but if you take a little longer, you get to be a part of that at Javelina too.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's the one where like everyone's dressed up and you fit right in, like looking like a Braveheart out there.
Yeah, totally. Okay, where I want to start things is on top of everything we've already said. I think you're like the number one empowerment guy in ultra running, and I think it's awesome. And I think no matter if you became Jim Walmsley, that would still be your number one quality. So what I want to start with and what you're good at is I'm running a 100-miler on Friday. So I'll be in the midst of that when this comes out. So and I want to demystify what a 100-miler is, because I'm sure you have athletes come to you that's their goal. They come to me. So let's just talk through what I'm going to be going through as we go through like the mileage of a generic 100 out there while people are listening to this. So I'll start us out, like get there, you check in, you've already got everything, your training's nailed, you have a great coach like Joe or something. You've got all the tools, but now you actually have to do the race. So let's just start with race morning or the night before. So I usually have some nerves, but I think with experience I've been pretty good at sleeping, just at least enough. So yeah, let's do those few like 12 hours before the race. How are you going into 100? What does it feel like out there?
Dude, I love this direction, by the way. I'm already like a huge fan of being on it. This is amazing. So I think like the 12 hours before, I think for me, it's like, one of my good coaches back in the day told me something that was very important. He said, like, don't just rest your body, but rest your mind too. And I think, I've been very notorious for just like shoving my life with just so many like crazy things and like trying to like milk every ounce of productivity that I can to get it done. And I've always found that like those 12 hours before the race is like not the time to like GSD. Sometimes you might have to, right? Like, I mean, when I did URA, I basically was like prepping right until I went to sleep, but it was just schedule kind of stuff. But if I have the volition to do it, like usually for me, I'm usually just trying to keep the mind at bay as much as I can. Like, and because I know that not only, for 100 miles, like you're going to be using your legs obviously out there, but you're also going to be using your mind to push through those really tough times. And your mind does expend calories. So it's like, I try to rest the mind as much as I can. So usually that's in a few different ways. Like it's not just sitting there and doing nothing all day, but I like to get like some good input in my mind. So whether I'm listening to an audiobook that fires me up, or like sometimes for me, I like to watch one of my favorite empowering movies. So like before Cocodona, like I watched The Last Jedi. Like I just love this whole story of the rebellion taking down the Empire. Sometimes I'll watch Rocky. Like, I don't know. I just like to like put good input in, because I truly believe the input that you put in equals the output that you put out there. So for me, I like to usually consume empowering things and everything like that. And then usually for me, like the night before a race, it could be like really cheesy and everything too, but I really like to just set the intention. It's like, I ask myself, it's like, what's the intention I want tomorrow? Do I want to learn? Do I want to push myself? Do I want to like be the best I can be? Like, and really just get grounded in that, because I believe that, where your focus goes, energy flows. And so in the end of the day, if you put that intention into the air and into the universe, whatever your kind of belief systems are, I truly believe you get that back to you in whatever way possible. So I sit there, I visualize the race, I get really clear on my intentions, I'll write it down, I'll think about it over and over again. And that like helps me to just really keep my focus onto there. Because listen, Jeff, same with you. I get nerves too, man. Like, I mean, I've been doing this for years, but like I get nerves. I think it's normal. But I found that like when I can be more intentional, it allows me to have the courage to go through even when I have those biggest nerves. So that's the biggest thing. And then I'll usually like slam a pizza also the night before and get some good rest. And that's what I inevitably do. So what's your biggest too? I'm curious for you. Like, so you got this in 4 days. So what are you doing?
Yeah. So I guess I change everything by changing nothing. So you basically drop training so much, and then I try to fill that with either starting a book or something that last week leading into something. And then I also do year round. It's pretty robust, or at least pretty frequent, of like meditative stuff. But as I get near an event or a race or an FKT, that's when I'm not a big YouTube guy, but I will watch some recap or some running on the race so that I have images of what the race looks like the Wasatch. I've run out there, so I have a few images or sections that I'll meditate on in my mind, and I'll just envision like running along them or just moving along them, that kind of thing, just to it's kind of like pre-connecting into the moment of what it's going to be like out there. And then, it's just recognizing you're going to have a lot more idle time. Let's say you top out at 12 hours of training for a 100-miler. You're probably going to be down to 2 or 3 for the week, for the 4 or 5 days leading into that race. And so it's already going to feel weird. And I think just pre-planning to have something to take up some time, whether that's a movie. I love giving my athletes, if they haven't watched it, Unbreakable, the Western States film.
Yes.
Because it does 2 things. It shows you the event you're going to be doing, but it also shows Jeff Rose go through some adversity and overcome it without, I don't know if everyone's seen it, so we won't completely spoil it, but it's like a really good, almost redemption story of you're never out of it. You walk away feeling good, and it's the event you're actually going to do. So I love giving that one out. So that's kind of my thing. And then try not to change anything from, you can try to go to bed earlier, but I think when you're ready to get up, just get up. I think it's hard to lay in bed and stare at the ceiling. So just pretty much like stick to your normal routine. Your body's gotten you this far. It's going to keep you under that same routine. That's kind of what I do. So now let's move into like the start and the beginning of the race, because this is the hardest thing I think personally to coach, because everyone feels good. Like they feel better than they have in any training run for weeks. They feel like they can go faster than they need to for a 100-miler. So what I do is I usually have a plan for this one with hills and stuff. It'll probably be the first 10 miles, but like a conservative, like hold myself back to this pace. I don't want to hit this 10-mile mark faster than this time frame. So I like to take all emotion, all running by RPE, rate of anything like that out of the equation, because I'm going to be feeling too excited, too fueled by nerves, too ready to ruin the rest of my race in those first couple hours. So I usually try to dictate how I'm going to run that ahead of time without any input in the moment, because I just take that input as not trustworthy, I guess. How do you treat the beginning of that race, and how are you feeling at the start?
Yeah, very similar. And I love that approach too, because I always say like this, right? Like when you're at the start line, you have so much adrenaline going through your body. Like you're just excited, you're fresh, you're tapered, like you're ready to go. And if you look at like, we know the classic example, but let's just apply it to ultra running here. But, a mother sees their kid underneath a car, like she's able to go through and lift that car up. Now, It's not that her muscles aren't working. It's not that she doesn't feel that stuff. It's like literally like she has so much adrenaline going through her system that pain is not even registering in her mind, because like she has that in there. Now, take that into the context of an ultramarathon. We're not hopefully lifting up, cars over kids, but what we are doing is we are going there and exerting ourselves. And because we have all that adrenaline in there, you said it best, we don't know how fast we're going, or we can justify it, right? Like we go ahead and we say, oh, well, I'm feeling real good, so therefore I can sustain this pace. But really, you might be thinking you're running at an RPE 3, but you could be running at a 4 or a 5, which, may not be sustainable in a 100-miler for most people. So all that said, I love your approach by like having that objective kind of ruling to kind of keep you in check. Now, for me, I like to kind of go at a little different, especially if this is someone who's doing like a first 100-miler or something like that. I usually like to say, run at an RPE like 2, but in general, like if you feel like it's a 2, adjust it down by 1. So it's like not as like variable on the pace and stuff like that, but it's more a variable on the RPE. And basically, because that's how I generally program athletes, is like by RPE. So I say like, hey, like most of their long runs are going to be at like a 3. So I say like, hey, for you, like if you feel like you're going at a 3, you're actually going at a 4. So just adjust down. So a really good piece of advice that I got from one of my coaches too before my first 100-miler was, if you think you're going too slow, go slower. And I've always shown that as a piece of advice. So very similar to you, I do stick with the RPE measure just because I also think that, if you look at guys like Rod Favard who like go out and have this amazing day at Western States, like I do think there is a chance that like people can like outperform maybe their long run paces if they're feeling mentally good or anything like that. And sometimes I like to kind of give a little bit of variety and like not as much on pace, especially if it's like technical terrain or something like that. But I usually just do RPE essentially -1 in their mind of what they're feeling, just to account for that adrenaline kind of boost. So yeah, very similar to your perspective, just a little different in terms of like RPE versus like kind of pace. But I think yours is completely valid for sure.
Totally. Yeah. And how do you feel at the start of a race? Do you feel that adrenaline? Are you just like, oh, I'm ready to go, like, let's send it? Are you thinking like, wow, there's so much to go, or wow, I'm so excited to start? What if someone was doing their first 100, what do they expect to feel at the start line?
Yeah, great question, man. I mean, so I definitely like now versus like my first 100 miler. So my first 100 miler, I remember I wasn't as nervous like leading up. I definitely had like nerves. And then the first time I went through a first 100 miler, it kind of hit me. Like, it's like you're at the start line, like the thing is real now. And like it hit me. It was like, whoa, I'm going to be out here for like 24 hours plus. Like, that's a long time. Like, I'd never been out there before. And like, that's where it went for my first 100 miler. And I just remember telling myself, it was like, dude, do not think of the whole thing in totality here. Like, literally just think about it from aid station to aid station. And that's kind of going to be the race too. So I remember standing at my first 100 miler, almost thinking about the whole grand journey ahead of me and almost getting a little overwhelmed. And I remember in my mind, the thing that helped to get me through was just see it from aid station to aid station. And when that even felt too long, just switching from the mile to mile. And I just told myself, run the mile you're in. And that helped me to alleviate a lot of that stuff. So I was definitely like, I think more nervous and excited on my very first 100 miler. But now as I've kind of gone through the rings of it, where I go through on my first, or any 100 miler that I step on, or even Cocodona, right? First 250. So that's even a first on that regards. The thing that I tell myself is like, I'm excited to learn what's going to happen out there. And there's something that I shift, making that shift to like, I'm excited to learn versus like, you know, we're going to be out here to perform. Number one, it kind of takes like a little bit of the pressure off of me, because like sometimes when we have performance, at least for me, and I know for some other people, there can be that like performance kind of anxiety of like, oh, like I have to do this. So if I F this up, it's going to be bad, where it's like, let's just learn and find out. And like basically like you either win or you learn, and there's no loss. And so therefore you kind of take down that downside on there, and it leaves you open to the possibilities. And I always get open to say like, what can I do out here today? What am I going to learn past mile 70? Like, am I trying this new fueling strategy for the first time? Am I going to throw up? Like, I don't care. Like, I'm just excited to learn. And for me, it's like all the excitement of like all the new lessons that I'm going to get. And that's usually the focus that I try to orient my mind on. And yes, I do get that voice coming into my head being like, this is going to hurt, it's going to be far and everything like that. But I say, no, I'm just here for the journey. I'm just here for the excitement. And that's what I get most excited for, is like all the lessons I'm about to learn out there. But what about you, Jeff? Like, I'm curious for you, like what's through your head?
Since I have such a different route to this whole world, I don't know. I don't feel so nervous as far as like the miles or what's going to happen out there. If there's a heat aspect, I've worked really hard on that mindset of treating it as like, maybe it'll never be my strength, but I'm never going to call it my weakness again, is sort of one way that I mentally deal with a race with heat, because I think that can draw on you. But just going back to the Arizona Trail FKT, which would have been my first premier one that I went after, I remember walking to the start of it and shaking so physically that, and like feeling like, oh my gosh, like once this clock starts, like I have to go and just push it really hard. And it was like this nervous excitement, shaking so much, and started it off and pushed maybe a little hard. It went straight uphill, but then everything normalizes. So if you're ever out there and attacking something that's really scary, like maybe it's 20 minutes, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours, it does eventually normalize. It's just being able to treat that 1 to 2 hours the way you have in training, but with very little feeling. Like your feeling is just, it's going to be numb. It's almost like you just got out of an ice bath and can't quite feel how it's impacting things. Or maybe you just drank a bunch of coffee. Maybe that jittery feeling would describe kind of how I feel at the start of things. But it's, that first one was the most drastic. And then everything after that has felt a little more normalized. Even the John Muir Trail, that was up there too, because it was just like, this is the one I've thought about for the longest. This is like my one last career goal. So starting that was a lot of pressure I put on myself, and I would not recommend it. It took about 40 miles to get out of that headspace of like thinking about achieving this thing in totality. And I just really like your point of breaking it down into the manageable chunks. And I think at the beginning, the smaller the manageable chunk, the better, because the quicker you start giving your brain wins, like, oh, I got to the first aid station, or, oh, I got to the first fence post at mile 3. The second you get those wins and that like dopamine hit of you're starting to move forward and achieve things in your goal, that's when things really start to feel possible, and you get to sink into the moment and really enjoy it, because there is a weird period between the start and when you get a little bit of accomplishment that you just kind of feel weird out there, like you're just too jacked up on coffee or something.
Yeah, dude, 100%. And I will say, like, I'm glad you brought the JMT, because, dude, there is literally, I take this from you. Like, I remember interviewing you after the John Muir Trail, and you told me that anytime you got to the mountain passes, you would put down a finger on your hand and visually see you putting it down. And I'm telling you, like every year at Javelina, like I've done that, like because like you've taught me that. And like, you know, at Javelina, it's like, okay, 1 loop down, boom, like now we got 4 to go. And it's something about visually like checking that box, seeing that. Like it's actually interesting. Like Jerry Seinfeld does a very similar thing with his jokes. Like he has like a joke writing ritual every single day, and he writes the jokes, even if it's bad, even if it's not good, but he checks it off. And there's something about that checking off on a calendar where you visually see it, or even just like putting down fingers or, you know, whatever, like doing something visually that like almost gets that celebration in your mind. So like, I just want to share that because it's a tip that I've used for sure. And it's helped me a ton. And I've learned that from you.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I love the, whatever it is that you're counting down, having the physical act of achieving it. And then it's almost like a feedback loop for me, because I struggle with depression and being proud of my own stuff. But it's like, okay, I got to this pass or did this. Now I'm physically putting down a finger to personally celebrate and remind myself that I did just do one of these huge steps in whatever it is that I'm doing. So yeah, it's just little feedback loops like that. I think little strategies that help you celebrate the success, because anything can happen out there in 100. And if you don't get to the end, you might as well have celebrated all the wins you got along the way, because there's nothing to be lost in that. The middle mile of 100 is just as far as the last mile of 100.
Oh, it's so true, man. And I love that analogy too. It's like the mile is the mile out there. Cause I think, you know, it's one of those things where even though like I think we all talk about like the chunking system, it's like there will be a point in 100 mile where your brain will say, hey, you got 80 miles to go. Like I've never been in a race where it like you don't see that too, but like you have to just be very good at celebrating the moments. I mean, even at Cocodona, right? I mean, you know, that was like the biggest thing. Like I just saw the race as like what my aid station was. And like every time I celebrated that aid station and just having it in there. So like, you know, I think there's just something so powerful in just running the mile you're in, running the section you're in, or even just the step. Like I remember my first year at Javelina, I went out way too hard at the beginning and I death marched in at the end, but I would literally find a cactus out there and I'd be like, all I need to do is get to that cactus. Boom. Awesome. Great. Get to the, like, it was literally just a race from cactus to cactus at the end. And that helped me to, you know, keep running towards the end.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, moving forward is moving forward, even if it's slow. So that's just a huge thing, especially when things are rough. All right, let's move into like the second-ish phase. And I always like to warn athletes of this one, because your body, your legs, whatever, will feel like they've run 20 or 30 miles after 20 or 30 miles. It's not because you're running 100 that they'll feel invincible for a bigger chunk. Like you will be like, wow, I'm kind of tired. I've only gone 20 miles, but yeah, that happens because 20 miles is still a long way to run. So this is that like sneaky time frame where it's like, whew, I feel pretty worked. And it's like, because you've run, let's just say around the 30 mile mark, you've run an ultra already, but you got basically 2 more 50Ks to go. Yeah. What are you telling yourself in this moment when it's like, okay, it's getting hot, my legs are kind of tired, but I still got a ways to go?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, you know, it's so interesting because I think a lot of times in long runs, like we only run to a certain point where, you know, your body is going to break down, right? Like if you're running out there for 4, 5, 6 hours, right? 7 hours, maybe on like some people doing 100 mile, like with like a lot of vert and stuff, like your body's going to break down like continuously, probably until the end. Like, and so I think it's easy to kind of take that experience and think like it's going to be similar in an ultra, like, so like meaning like it's always going to get worse. And I think that's like, that's the thought that can like be really jarring. It's like, okay, this hurts now and it's going to keep getting worse because I have 70 miles to go. But there's something that I've seen, and it was really, really profound to me, you know, once I started to do like multiple races, was that like, I always tell myself one thing, like it never always gets worse. Like there is usually a point where you do get a second win and sometimes not. I mean, I had 100 milers and even some longer races where it hasn't turned around, but at least I hold on to the hope of that. And I know that it's like, okay, well, I think there's going to be a turnaround, because like, if you like, I've had races too before, like earlier on into my career, where I've gotten to the mindset of like, this is just going to continuously get worse and worse and worse and worse. And think about it logically, if that's the case, then, you know, it's going to be a depressing kind of thought. But if you're like, oh, there is going to be a bounce back, that keeps you in the fight and keeps going on in there as well. So like for me, I always tell myself, it doesn't always get worse. There might be a bounce back period. There might be a low point, or there might be a low point that's going to turn around at the high point. And I think that hope like definitely keeps me going too. But I also think the third thing too is like telling myself this of like, this is what I came here for. Like, I did not come here to have it easy. I came here to hurt. And I think something that can really trip people up, like you said it best, right? Like, I think there is a notion, and I've actually never heard someone explain it the way that you did, and I think it's incredible, is that like, I think there is a notion saying, well, if I'm running 100 miles, I should feel good at mile 30 and 40. Like, there's almost like an unspoken kind of thought that we have about that. But I think it's like, well, I've ran 30 miles. Yes, it's going to hurt at that point, but it's like, I came here to push myself. I came here to feel this thing. It's like there's almost like a desire you got to link to that kind of feeling to be good. I think, one of the reasons why Courtney is so good is because she loves the pain cane. Like, that's what she is there for. And I think she like loves it too. Similar with you, man. Like, I think you've been very, very good at suffering. I've always like told people, I think you're one of the best people at suffering out there, because that's, like that's what you're there for. And I think when there's like the acceptance of it, as opposed to, maybe some athletes who say like, well, I want to delay this pain as much as possible. Like, that means that if you do hit it early, and listen, I've had some races where, you feel it way earlier than a long run. You're like, what do I do at this point? But you're like, oh, this is the feeling I came for. It's like accepting it with open arms and almost like running with the pain as if it's like a pacer for you, and just accepting that it's there. So I do that thing. It's like knowing that it's not going to be forever and probably for the rest of the race. And then two, having just an acceptance of like, this is what I came for. That way I'm not resisting it. And that way I also have some hope that it's going to bounce back. And that way it just kind of keeps me more forward looking, as opposed to like dwelling on the pain that I think can be kind of used if you try to push it away, or you have an expectation of like, I should feel invincible by mile 30. So anyways, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, given that, dude, I just love
yeah. I want to stick on you for a second here, because I think you're really good at, as you've progressed and stuff, you really attack and embrace the unknown of what's coming. Yeah. And why I kind of came up with that 30-mile mark is that's probably around what the longest run in training, if they didn't do a training race or something, would be. So you've just surpassed the longest you've done in training, and you're entering that unknown. And I'd love for you to talk maybe about like Cocodona or some of these things, where how you, instead of fear or like crippling fear for some people, how you've embraced or get excited about that unknown, because around that 30 to 40 mile mark is where it's like, my legs hurt. What's going to happen now? This is scary. Uh-oh. How do you deal with that feeling?
Such a good question, man. I think it comes with getting more reps in being in the unknown and showing what you can do. And I always say the more times that you venture into the unknown, the more known that it gets. And my example of that is like, I think, so for example, when I first did like 100 miles, and usually like 100 miles is a scary jump for a lot of people, because think about it, like the traditional race distance that's right below that is 62 miles, 100K, right? And that's a pretty big jump to go from 62 to 100, right? 50 miler to 100K is only 12 miles. Even a 50K to, a 50 miler is, is less than 20 miles, right? So like, all that being said, like they're relatively small jumps, but 100K is a big jump. And I remember the first time like thinking about that, and I was like, wow, that's like a tough jump. Like, oh my gosh, but I did it. And then, I would do, another race that was even harder or anything like that. And it's like, I did it. And like, the first time I did Javelina, that was the first time I was going to run 100 mile, like fast. And I ran, I was like, I want to run every step, and I did it. And I didn't know what that was going to feel like, but I got through it. So to take it to Cocodona, right? I remember the moment exactly. Fane Ranch, you get the 100-mile side, and I remember seeing that, and I remember going past that, and I was like, "This is it. This is the moment." And of course, like my brain did start going, "All right, man, this is the great unknown. You don't know what it's like at this point. Here it is, and you got 150 miles to go, which is even bigger jump than going from 100K to 100 miles." But I remember this. I said, "You know what? I've been in the unknown before, and I show myself that I can get through it." And you gain the confidence in that, because confidence, the reason why people get confident is because they've done it before, right? You look at someone who's like really confident talking up to women, it's probably because they've had a lot of success talking with women in the past. You look at someone who like lines up to a race really confident, it's probably because they've gone through and maybe smashed a race before. Now, of course, there's also, false confidence and things like that too, but real confidence is like when you've done the damn thing and you can line up, right? Like, so for you, like, I remember you talking about the John Muir Trail, you're like, yeah, man, like I've done the Arizona Trail, I've done the Colorado Trail, like I've done these like really hard things, and that gives you the confidence in there. So passing Cocodona, it's remembering thinking about those things. Now, if someone's racing a first 100 miler and they've never done an ultra distance before, I say, well, it doesn't have to be ultra related. It can be something in your life. You didn't know what it was like to be a father, but here you are raising 2 kids. You didn't know what it was going to be like doing. It's like always trusting in your ability to get through the unknown, I think really helps. And it's not just like some BS, like mantra that you're kind of just saying to yourself. It's like rooted in evidence that like you can do the damn thing. So like at Cocodona, I said, you know what, 100 miles was scary to me, and I did it. Running 100 miles was scary, and I did it before. It's like leaning on the ability that you have conquered the unknown in the past.
Yeah, and I like even leaning on like maybe a college class that was really hard that you didn't feel like you had the talent for, and you had to grit it out with just hard work. Like if you have a couple of those, even if they're not running related, in the back of your mind of like, even when I wasn't like presented like the God-given ability to do well in this scenario, I still came out the other side. And I think, yeah, that's exactly the way to frame that, like, oh no, into like, okay, I am just doing this for time number 10 or whatever you've done in your life. So that's kind of how I think about it. And then I guess for me, when my legs feel tired, I think I just start to focus in on like, okay, now I've stripped away like the pre-race start. Now I'm kind of in the mode. I know what this feeling of my legs being tired is. Maybe if we take out any history or something, it might be like, okay, well, my legs are tired. This is usually the end of my long run, but now I know what this feels like. Like I can just keep running, or I can start breaking things down in my head. It's like, it actually gives me comfort because then you're naturally feeling how your legs are supposed to feel. My mind can usually wander because it's like, I like feeling a little tired out there, a little beat up. That's like the normal part. You're kind of in the heat of it. But yeah, it's almost like this comfort. You're back to trusting your RPE training, your rate of perceived exertion. If anyone out there, you know your body again at this point, because I like to just turn it into the positive. It's been 30 miles. I usually feel this way after 30 miles. So things are good. Like it's okay. Things are going to be hard for the next 60, 70 miles, but that's the fun of it. So, and then, yeah, let's move into the next phase. This is my favorite phase. It's when you kind of hit the end of the day. Every day we get up, and most of us don't really nap. So you go to bed at a certain time, and then you sleep overnight. But the next stage of this ultra, or where we'll hit it, is about when you would go to bed normally, but you have, let's say, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 miles still staring at you. And instead of going to bed, you're just going to continue to do what you've done the entire day. And this is when I think it's tricky for a lot of people, because chairs look more comfortable, warm food tastes better, your headlamp is not that fun to follow, you're cold, it's hard to keep going. But I guess I'll start with this one, and how I like to attack it in this frame is like, I have somehow tricked myself in that I love the night because I consider it a new adventure. Like what I get to do is, my whole world is really small. It's now what I can see with my headlamp. Maybe when I get into an aid station, it's that. So the whole world of all the views, everything that was inspiring and intriguing is completely different. I just flip everything on its head and enjoy almost a completely new feel of a race, where I can have any internal thoughts, feelings, images, and there's not all these distractions externally. So I focus on that, as well as, I don't know, whatever your fueling or race plan is, but I treat it as a really, I mean, I don't love sensory overload anyway. So I treat it as like a blessing that all these things are eliminated and my thoughts can be going anywhere. People are quieter. It's just like a really pleasant time. And that's just come from years of embracing it. How do you attack that as night is hitting?
Oh, dude. Well, first of all, man, I love that. It's like a whole new adventure. It's like kind of like a reset almost, like for your mind. It's like, this is a new race, and it's kind of like almost, I can see how it can be a more exciting thing, right? It's like you start the beginning of the race because it's an exciting new chapter, and now you're flipping the book to a whole new chapter at the nighttime. I love that. You know, it's kind of similar the way that I look at it. I see it more of like almost like a return to kind of the primal self, or like this animalistic side of, you know, the human nature, right? So I think a lot of the times, like when, you know, we're outside and we're running, like what are the things that, you know, generally come to mind of the people who like to, or the things that like to be outside? It's the nocturnal beings, right? And this, I know it's going to sound a little weird, but like for me, I almost like to use that as a time to like tap into kind of like that primal, like instinctive energy. Like, as weird as that sounds, I think there is something where you can tap into where you almost see yourself as a nocturnal animal, like whether it's, a wolf running through the night or, your favorite animal who loves to just like be out there in the prowl, or even if there's like, mythical beings like werewolves and stuff like that, or anything like that, that thrives in that nighttime. And I don't know what it is. It's like, maybe it's that sleep deprived state, that huge caloric deficit that you're inevitably going to get into, or maybe it's just like just being out there in just different kind of like spooky things. But I think there's like a flip innately inside of us that kind of brings us back to that stripped down nature of like who we are at our core, which is like, in the end of the day, we're animals. Like, we are animals. Like, yes, we have a prefrontal cortex that, has us make decisions and makes like memories and logic. But I think in that mode, it's like, you're an animal. And like, when you think about a lot of animals, like, they just don't think, they just kind of do, right? And in the moment, it's like, I don't have to think about here. I just got to go. I just got to do. And so for me, I kind of like just lean into that instinctive nature. And I like, I talk about this a lot. I have an alter ego like of a wolf out there. And I kind of like imagine myself as a wolf and leaning into that instinctual kind of thing. And that way, like, it not only like has me tap into it too, but I also see it beneficial because it kind of removes you from you in that moment, because a lot of the time with us, like you mentioned it before, the headlamp isn't fun to follow, the food tastes great, the sitting looks good. Like, that's like our like human needs trying to come into contact there. But if we see ourselves like this instinctual beast that is like out there hunting prey, like getting the job done, whatever he's doing, like that stuff is not us in the moment. It gets us like kind of easier to detach us from like those human needs that are in the moment too. So I almost like to kind of put into a different persona in those times. Because for me, like I would say I do not like running in the night. Like, it would never be my choice. Like, I get kind of creeped out and things like that too. So I try to not be me in that moment. I try to be something else. I try to be that instinctual wolf, that animal. And that like allows me to do it. And by the way, if anyone's listening to this saying, Joe, you're freaking crazy, why do you imagine yourself as a wolf? Like think about like an alter ego or something that you can step into in that moment to really just kind of like remove yourself from like any insecurities or fears or anything like that. And, a lot of people have done this over time, right? Like Eminem has Slim Shady, like Beyonce has Sasha Fierce. Like, there's a totally different like science of this that I go into, but I almost like kind of use the night to like take the mask off and be someone else, or put the mask on, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I feel the same thing. I've never assigned an animal or name to it, but I can harness an almost direct adrenaline so well at night. Once it becomes afternoon, I look forward to the night beginning, because I feel like I don't know, it is a totally different feeling. So we can assign it an alter ego feeling, but it is like there's like a bunch of clarity of like, should I be taking, like on the John Muir Trail is the most vivid of like the last 50 miles. I knew instinctually when I should take a nap, or when I face planted falling asleep while running. It's like, okay, should I be pushing adrenaline or caffeine, or should I take a nap? And it was like so easy to flow through those decisions. It was like that carnal nature of like, this is just how I act. So it was like nap here. And then I always like a few different physical cues help me harness some adrenaline of just like squeezing fists, narrowing eyes, and then a couple deep breaths, and then just like charge into the night. But it's totally the alter ego, or let yourself feel like a 5-year-old, where you can zoom around in your new shoes. Like, I think the night can be harnessed in two different ways, of scary and not inviting, or like, let's see what this whole thing's about. Just like the start of the race, you could do, I love how you said 2 different races. You could have that jittery caffeine feeling again of like, let's go see what this whole night thing's about. So I love that.
Yeah, dude. And that's like the thing. It's like getting the stoking. Because I think honestly, like a big thing that like, what I always say, like people say like, what makes someone mentally tough or like mentally able to go through things? And honestly, I think it's just remembering. Like, I think it's remembering, because a lot of times we forget. Like, we know that we like adventure, but we forget it at the nighttime once we're super tired and everything like that. Like, we know that we can keep going, but we forget it because our legs are super screaming. It's like, we know that like we can find like the fun and even just the nighttime out there, but we forget that because we want to be warm and want to get to the next aid station and sit by that fire. It's like remembering, like even like you said, and even like this goes to like a deeper psychological thing. It's like a lot of the times, like, as a kid, we had the joy and we had like the, spontaneity of life, but we forget that as we get older because, life is hard and there's like beliefs that get formed and like a bunch of other stuff. It's like, you just got to remember who we are innately at our core. Like whether it is the kid who loves the adventure, whether it is, that innate animal who can push through that stuff. It's like remembering those things in the moments, or even if it's as simple as like remembering like why you're out there in the first place, right? Like I think it's just a matter of remembering and using that night as a cue to remember the stove, remember that innate animal, whatever is the thing that does for you. It's like, remember those things. Because I think anyone can lay out like a clear plan of like, yeah, this would be an ideal 100-mile race. It's like, remember that in that moment. Then like, I think that's the biggest thing. And using the night as a cue, like could be something that can help with that.
Yeah. I think mine must be just like wearing a tiger sweatshirt anyway. So maybe that's just the alter ego right there.
I was just about to say, I was like, you gotta be the tiger given like that outfit, man. That's like signature Jeff Garmire.
I know. I think that's just me. It just always helps me remember to like take things a little lighter because I don't know. I think just in zooming out just for a second, it can feel like the biggest, most insurmountable thing in the world when you're in the middle of an ultra. But if you do zoom out, it can also be like, and why I like to wear, I've done everything from temporary tattoos to face paint to costumes, but just little subtle reminders, whatever it is, maybe with your crew, your pacer who might give you a dumb joke, of remembering it is not the biggest thing in the world. And it can also be the biggest thing in the world at the same time. But if you can think about those two at the same time, I think it can be very important of like, this doesn't define the rest of your life. This doesn't define your worth, but it also can be the most meaningful thing to you in that moment. And then I think if you do that right, it can take away the pressure, but also push you forward.
So good. It's so well said, man. I love that. It's like life is meaningless, but it's full of meaning at the same time. It's like the biggest dichotomy of all time, but it's so important.
All right, let's move into we'll just call this the last phase. So the sun is rising, your body's wrecked, and this is where I think you have to, it's leaning more into things emotionally. Like your legs know how, assuming you trained correctly for this, your legs, even if you haven't, your legs will probably get you to the finish. But this is where it's all mental. And I think this is where one of the other great things from your podcast, you're really good at bringing people into your why on each race that you've done. But I think this is where you can probably make it 70, 75, 80 miles without even thinking about that why. But this is when you're going to really need to hold on to that why and get to the finish, because I know externally we all look at someone who dropped out at mile 90 and it's like, why couldn't they just walk it in? And it's sort of like, well, if it feels like there's no reason to, then there's no reason to. So I think this is where that mental, emotional side matters a lot more than the physical side. So how do you feel kind of in these last 4 or 5 hours headed into it, coming up with that, I just got to keep going, got to chunk this down, figure out a way to get to the end?
Yeah, and you said it best, man. It's like really going into the why, but I think it goes deeper than that because, and like one of the most impactful stories was when I ran the UAR 100 this year. And the cool thing about that course is like it's out and back. So you see like so many people throughout and you get to see a lot of the same people, which is super cool. So you're never really alone out there. And there was 2 people that I saw in the race out there. And that was a really hard race for me. It was way out of my comfort zone. Like I'm not used to doing like big alpine vert. Like I think it was like way out of my comfort zone. And so, but I was curious of like, why do people sign up for this race? So there's one guy that I was running with for a little bit and we started talking. I was like, hey, like just super curious, like, why are you doing this race? And he's like, like I thought it was pretty cool, like get to, like mag peaks, all that kind of stuff. I was like, oh, all right, like that's interesting. Like this is a pretty tough race to just like think it's kind of cool, but all right, whatever. So like, anyways, like we split up at some part. Then at another time, like I met another guy and we started running. I was like, hey man, like why are you doing this? He's like, well, man, like. He's like, my daughter, she has special needs. Like she struggles every day. She's always in pain. And she always just says like how she can continue going on because she sees daddy doing hard things all the time. And I was like, wow, damn. Like, dude, I get chills every time I just say that. I remember him saying that. And like, dude, I even like almost started crying. Like I was like, whoa. And now let me tell you this. Now there's so many other variables that can go into it, but we went to the mile 68 station. Guess who I saw putting in their tracker versus the person who was keep going? It was definitely
probably the one with the fragile why.
Yeah, the fragile why. Now, of course, right, there could have been a bunch of other things, but I will tell you, like, even if that guy was probably going through, what he was going through, I didn't look like he was injured or anything, but I'm not making assumptions. But regardless, the point still stands true. It's like, if you have a why that makes you cry, you can really do anything. And that's like the big thing too, because I think a lot of people, like know the advice of like have a why, but it's like you gotta have something that like emotionally hits you. I mean, even when I was talking about that guy's why to you, Jeff, like I felt like chills go through my body, like you feel the tears, and if that's not even mine, it's like, man, like if that's making me feel like that, how do you think that guy feels about it? So it's like I always say, it's like you want to define the why, but it can't just be this race is cool. It can't just be I just want to like, you know, see what I can do. It's like, what's that thing that's going to like really set your soul on fire? Because you said it really good is that at the end of that race, like you're really running more on mind than muscle. And you want to be able to make sure that mind is getting as fired up and emotionally charged as possible, because if your why is greater than whatever pain you're going through, you're going to get it done. And it doesn't have to be, you know, something like, oh, I'm doing this for other people. Like there can be something inside you that fires you up. Like I know some people, they're like, hey, I got a chip on my shoulder. People were doubting me. I'm like, if that fires you up, go for it, right? Like, or some people are like, hey, like I just really want to do this for myself to know that I can do this and know I can get through this. Like if that emotionally wells you up, great. Like, and so like I literally like for me, and that's kind of like goes back to the original question of like, what do you do the night before? Like I literally sit there and get so emotionally invested in my why out there. And it helps me. And like for me, like over the years, like just to kind of go like, because I know you asked like, what do I kind of do in this situation? Like for me, I think about every single one of my athletes who I coach. I think about everybody listening to the podcast. And I'm like, my decisions right here are going to directly impact how they feel. Now, that might not be true. It might not be the thing. But for me, it's always like, well, how I show up here, I'm hoping is going to inspire people to do that challenge, do that race, like be the best person that they can be. And man, like that, like I got chills, like saying it. And that's the point. It's like you want that emotional reaction because that's going to help you to flow through. Because when you have the why that's greater than the pain, that's going to allow you to push through it, even when it's hard, even when you want to sit, even when you want to, you know, dilly-dally or anything like that. Like that's the big thing. So anyways, that was a huge tangent, but I just got fired up.
Yeah,
but
I want to stay on this tangent for a second because I do want to break down two aspects of the why. We'll give a couple more examples because I think it's important, and your story is so incredible, but I don't want it to feel like you have to have a why that great in order to do things. But the other thing is like the difference of having a why versus putting pressure on yourself. I think there's a pretty big difference of putting pressure that you need to finish, and that's usually from maybe a self-worth or external validation type thing. But a why can simply mean something like the Arizona Trail FKT. Went after it, no idea if I could get it. The reason I wanted to go after it was that I wanted to show myself that I could venture and be more than just a thru hiker, like go after this, try to bridge the gap, see, am I actually athletic? Can I be the athlete I always wanted to be growing up? So that was my why, invested in that. And I could have had a successful FKT for that why within 2 or 3 days of just being like, I was on pace, I did it, something went wrong, didn't work, out of my control. So I think that's kind of the difference of the why versus pressure. There's always going to be pressure, but your why, if something out of your control happened, you should still be able to hold on to that why and feel like you gave it your best shot because of that reason. You didn't just walk away when it got hard. Your why just needs to get you through when it's hard. And if something comes up, that's racing. That's okay. But I think I want to hit on that difference from pressure. And then, I guess I'll give the first example of another why. Might be if that guy, let's just say a random guy did Ouray and lived up here in Montana. And the why could be something as simple of, I will never visit this area unless I sign up for this race. And my goal is to experience the San Juans because I watch the live stream on Hard Rock every year, or I've heard how beautiful. That can be an awesome why. It doesn't need to be external, related to someone else, but something that you care deeply about and you really want to do. I think just to give a counter example that might be a little more relatable to some people.
Oh, for sure. And I'm so glad that you said that too, because like, it's like, we're all different. I mean, I know some people who are like out there for just the love of the game, and that might be more than enough, right? Like, it doesn't have to be like an altruistic thing or like, you know, for other people, it's like, I just love this so much. Right. And like, notice how when I tell the story, like the way the guy said it was like, I thought it was cool versus like, dude, I love it out here in the mountains. This is what sets my soul on fire. Like, this is where I find myself. Like, this is where, like, that's like a whole different kind of thing. So I love that too. Because I use that example because it's like super, but it doesn't, it has to be like really for that person and for you. If like you absolutely love it and like that gives you that emotional response, like that's there too. So yeah, I love that you brought that up because everybody's different. And it can be simple, but it's got to be like emotional. Like you got to be stoked by it, you know?
Yeah, totally. Okay. Well, we've gotten everyone to the finish with their why. Let's just go into the next little bit, because I think it's really hard and no one talks, or it's not very talked about, the letdown after you achieve your 100, you hit your goal. And it's really hard because I am one of the types of people who likes to just grab on and throw another goal up there without letting myself really enjoy the moment. And I heard an interview with Tom Evans where he said he didn't enjoy Western States very much last year because he was looking forward to his next race at UTMB. So I think it's at least worth musing on for a couple minutes of like, you should celebrate hitting a goal that big. And I think it's almost human nature to do like a quick Instagram post and then move on. But how do you internalize and think through what you just accomplished when you do accomplish a goal like that?
Yeah, for sure, man. And I think this is something that honestly, it's almost like an epidemic in our society now. It's like we're always just on to the next thing. And I think ultra runners are very, very prone to this relative to just normal people. Because think about it, like we're usually overachievers. We're usually people who love achievement or love challenge. And generally, like we're the types of people who just always love to do the next thing. Like I'm very much the same way as you. And so sometimes if we just kind of, it's like a run out there in a race. Like if you just breeze through it, you don't even understand the beauty that's around there. Like there's some races where I've just been so focused on just like getting the thing done that like I can't even tell you like what the sights were out there. Like there's been times where I've done a race, only focus on the goal or only focus on that next thing. And then I run the trail again and I was like, whoa, like these are the sights out here. It's because I wasn't even just taking stock in the moment. And like we can do that in races. It's like, and I think it's a very like harmful thing to do, not just from a life perspective, but like from a self-empowerment perspective. Because it's like, again, like where the confidence builds, like in life in general, like I kind of mentioned before, is like doing the damn thing. But if you don't realize that you've done the damn thing, you can't really become confident. And it really can be like less tools in your toolbox to pull out when it's tough. So like for me, all the time, I like to reflect on this thing. So anytime I do a race, like usually within 24 hours or so, I'll open up, I have a notebook here that's like a race log journal. I'll open it up and I always ask myself 3 different questions that I write down. The first thing is, what am I most proud of on this race? Like celebrate the wins, like and really take stock of that. And like, to be honest, like, you know, I struggle with like depression and anxiety like back in the day. And like, even to this day, like I have bouts like where, you know, I have depression come in waves and stuff like that. And one of the things that helped me to really get through that just from a day-to-day basis is at the end of every single day, I would open up the book and I would write the things that I was proud of. Even if it was just waking up on time with my alarm, or even if it was like cleaning up the house, like just these minute things, like celebrating those things and like recognizing like, holy crap, like I actually did some good stuff today. Like that is good. Now, do that in the span of a race, you're like, dude, like, wow, I nailed my nutrition plan. Like, man, I felt like walking like for 20 miles, but I ran that whole thing. Like those are things that you internally can celebrate about yourself, because not just to feel good, but to give yourself confidence going into the other races. So sitting down, reflecting on that and celebrating it. The second thing is, what are the lessons I learned from the race? I think it's, even if you nail a race, I always think there's lessons. Like I've had races where I deem to be very, very good. I've had races where I've won, but I've always learned something from it. And I think like those lessons are so valuable because it allows you to be better in the next thing. Now, it's not supposed to be like a beat yourself up kind of thing. Notice it's not, what did I do wrong? It's, what did I learn? It's a different kind of framing.
Let me stop you there too. This is the thing that Joe said at the beginning he was excited about. So let's just notice how you connect like mile 0 to point 2 on your post race. Like, I'm excited to see what lessons I learned. I think that's pretty cool that it's like a through line through your entire race experience. Like, I'm excited to what I'll learn. And then after the fact, what did I actually learn? That's pretty fun.
Exactly. It's like the follow-up. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Yeah, because it's like the follow-up. And, you know, it's interesting. Like, I just did a fixed time event where, you know, I did come out in first place, but I had way more lessons learned than I did, like, things I was proud of. Not from, like, an inadequacy perspective, but, like, more of, like, I just love the lessons. And I think it's just so cool. They're, like, little nuggets of information. Like, Cocodona, I was way far from the goal that I was wanted to do, but I remember being so freaking stoked because I got 30, 40 lessons that, like, I'm stoked to try in the next 200. So that was the second question. Then the third question is, how am I going to act on these lessons in my next training block? So like, it is like, there's a difference between like recognizing it, right? I always say like, you can go to therapy and you can figure out all the things you need to do, but if you don't actually go and implement the things in your life, that therapy is pointless. So like, you like want to go and like actually implement those things. So it's starting to think about those things. So that way you kind of bridge it between, you celebrate the wins, you take away the lessons, and then you move on to the thing too. But listen, I don't think you have to jump into the next race if you don't want to, because here's the other thing too. You finish the race. I always say this. You don't have to jump into the next training block unless you are physically ready, obviously, but also mentally ready, right? Sometimes you might just want to rest on your laurels a bit. Sometimes you might want to get away from the structure of training. That's totally okay. Training is hard. Like, it's not easy. And so, like, if you want to take that mental break, take it. Savor the win. Like, don't feel like you got to jump into the next thing. That's always, like, something I tell my athletes, like, for sure. But anyways, that's my post-race process. But I'd love to hear yours, Jeff. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to, on that point, like, mentally, emotionally, and physically ready for the next thing, this is like my biggest thing in coaching, and it's always a weird thing right after a race, but I always call it mile zero. Like, we want to figure out when you're going to be ready for mile zero again. Yeah. Like, when you are at mile zero and you have to go 50K, 100 miles, whatever your next race will be, we don't want to put you at mile zero before you're ready on all three of those aspects. And so I think that's just a pretty important thing. And for me, I'm always physically ready very quickly. It's always the mental and emotional side of just like, is this going to feel like a chore or a celebration of the training? So I think that's just a really good point. How I do it after a race is, man, usually, I don't know. I think it takes a few days for me. There's usually a gap. Like, I usually push into deep sleep deprivation. I don't race too much short anymore. So everything is pretty mentally exhausting. So I'll pick up the pieces and ease back into maybe the things that I have to do. And then 3 or 4 days later, usually have a few sessions of just like sitting in silence, phone on silent, no distractions, and just sort of think through. I love doing this with Cocodona because I know the course so well, but I'll think through not necessarily every mile, but every type of terrain. I'll just like close my eyes and slowly think of like, oh, how did the start go? How did I feel at that? How did I go off? Did it feel like I went too fast? And then it's like, and then I eased into that second aid station, or then it like there was that climb, then I passed them. And then that's when I'll kind of get things in my mind of like what actually happened out there. And I've always done that through writing, just from blog posts back in the day. Every day of through hiking, I'd write what happened through the day. But now I just kind of mentally take stock of that. And then that's when I do narrow in on like what I did really well. And so I haven't even raced since Cocodona. So if we took Cocodona, it'd be like, I did really well in the heat, which I was impressed with. I was quite mentally tough. And then I was very efficient when presented with the adversity. And then and then I usually just think of like, what are some question marks or things that, didn't go quite as well. And my number one would be I had an Achilles injury at mile 50. But so that's a little of a wishy-washy one. But I think it's really celebrating that and connecting a race goal or a process goal, which is what I like to do a lot of, with how that went. And ideally, at least 1 or 2 of those would be successes. And so for me, like certain things I did with the heat were successes, so I can get fulfillment out of that. And then you can acknowledge some of the issues of like an injury or something like that as well. So a little less like writing it down, but I'm very visually tied. And so I love, well, at least in my mind, I love putting the image like almost like a flip book of like what everything happened out there, which events were part of it. And then it's almost like I close the book on it at that point and put it back on the shelf of my mental library of that race, and then kind of move on to the next one and decide where I'm going from there. But yeah, I think I just have to mentally wrap my mind around it a few days removed and just think through start to finish. And it's just funny because different things will pop out of like, oh yeah, I dropped that wrapper and had to go back down, bend down and grab it. And it was like, wow, I'm pretty sore. But then I was able to run pretty fast from there. Like little funny things like that'll just be like fun anecdotes to remember and things like that. So that's kind of how I like to process a race. So this is a little bit unplanned, but now that you've given all this expert wisdom, I do just want to do a quick overview of where you came from too, because I think it's pretty fascinating that you didn't grow up an athlete and now are a quite accomplished athlete. So with all this walkthrough on what 100 feels like and how to do one, I'd also like to make it a little less scary of like, you have to be this premier athlete to go after one. So yeah, let's just start with what was like middle school and high school Joe like?
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate your kind words in saying that. Yeah, middle school and high school Joe is way different than current Joe. I mean, like my idea of a good time, not as much in middle school, but definitely early high school was just, well, first of all, it was doing stuff to be liked. And a lot of the things that didn't get me liked was sports, because I was not naturally athletic. I was always picked last every single pickup game. Like I was always made fun of. Like kids would actually like throw a football to me because they thought it was how funny how much I flinched by the football or the way that I caught a football. Like I was, yeah. And so like I was just known to be just very unathletic. And so for me, I didn't even try to go to sports. I didn't even put my hat in the ring because I knew that I would get laughed at. I knew it was like dumb. And honestly, like I had this belief that like that's who I was. It was like because I was born unathletic, then I am unathletic and I won't be able to play sports for the rest of my life. And so for me, like what was the thing that I was good at? I was good at partying. I was good at doing drugs. I was good at drinking. Like I was good at all that stuff. So that was my idea of a good time, especially in high school. Not as much middle school. Middle school, I was doing like more like hoodlum middle school stuff. And then, I get into high school and I'm, drinking, doing drugs, blacking out and all that stuff as well. And then, basically into college, that exacerbated. I went to like a really big party school and was in a fraternity. And so you can imagine that just got accelerated to full kind of tilt. But really a lot of that insecurity was just fueling my need to kind of do these things because I was trying to not only be liked, but I was trying to mask like this person who I was very unhappy with because I believed that who I was the born person I would be, fixed for the rest of my life, not being able to be fixed, not being able to be changed. And there was that too. It also led to me get addicted to Adderall because I was like prescribed as a kid because I had ADHD. And then, the doctor gave me a choice. He's like, dude, I don't think you need this anymore because I think you can function. I was like, no, I need this thing because I had this belief that that's like I was inevitably screwed up and I couldn't be fixed. So all this stuff led me to just blow up my life. I mean, I was, with a girl for 4 years that I thought I was going to get married to. She dumped me. I let like my job on Wall Street crumbled. I moved back in with my parents, like at, like 20 plus years old. And I just remember being on the floor of like my childhood room in my parents' house, staring up at the ceiling. And I was like, what is going on? Like something has to change. And I don't really know what it was, but, something compelled me to, go pick up a self-help book and try to figure it out. And, the belief in that self-help book that kind of got me on the kick was that it doesn't matter who you are today. It doesn't matter what you were born in. It doesn't matter, what you can do now. What matters is, are you willing to learn and put in the work to be who you want to be? And that doesn't just mean an athlete. It means, do you want to be sober? Do you want to be a father? Do you want to be someone who's a good friend? Like, do you want to be a good worker? Like, if you feel like you weren't born those things, you can become those things. And so for me, like, I wanted to become someone who was fulfilled. Like that was really in the end of the day, like I had no intention of being an ultra runner, an athlete, like none of that stuff. I just wanted to really be fulfilled with my life. And one of the things that helped me to go there, I remember going on Google and searching how to get sober. Like that was literal Google search that I had. And literally like a common thread was to get healthy. And so for me, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go and run. Like I don't really want to go to a gym because I was afraid of being laughed at. So all I did was just get running shoes and run. And let me say the first run I did was like a quarter mile. I remember wheezing. I remember my ankles hurt. Like I remember just like being so exhausted. But I remember I was like, you know what, maybe I'll give this belief thing a try and see, if I keep up with it, maybe I can get better at it. And I kept up with it, went from 5K, which by the way, everyone hears me talking about this. My first 5K, I couldn't even walk the next day. I was like limping. I was bartending at the time. The lead bartender sent me home because he's like, dude, you look like an idiot right now. That's a 5K. And so I did that on a 5K, but I moved at the ranks. But along the way, I realized that like I can get better because I was doing 5K, 10K, half marathon, eventually marathon, and then ultra. And I ended up getting sober along the way too. And to this year will be 7 years sober without Adderall, which I'm like super pumped about, and haven't had a drink in like 9 years at this point too. So like that's the thing I'm the most proud of. So like for me, like, and again, like, I use ultra running as a vehicle for it. But the reason why I do what I do, the reason why I coach athletes, the reason why I have Everyday Ultra podcast, the reason why I'm on here talking with you, Jeff, is because I want people to know it doesn't matter if you are unathletic, you can become an ultra runner. It doesn't matter, if maybe you had a rough upbringing, like you can change your life. It doesn't matter who you are now. What matters is what are you going to do to get there? You can do those things. And if you have that belief, you can do absolutely anything. So like if you're listening to this now and you're seeing me and Jeff, Jeff has done like all these like FKTs, amazing stuff. Like I've done 200 miles, like I always say, like, you can do these things too. Like, you can do these things too if you're willing to, like, learn and put in the work. But most importantly, you got to believe that it's possible. And that's the biggest thing. And that's kind of what I do. So anyways, didn't mean to go on a whole, like, monologue there. But
no, I got just two more lighter questions just because we like to keep it light here too. So my first question. I
just went straight heavy on it too.
No, it's great. I think every once in a while it's time to get serious too. So did you quit drinking before you legally could drink?
No, I legally could drink. So I quit drinking. Gosh, how old was I? I think I was 23 when I quit drinking.
Okay.
So yeah, because I was 7 years. I'm about to be 30. So yeah, I was 23. But I started drinking when I was 15. Like, I mean, just, I was drinking for a while.
And was there a event or story or thing that happened that led you to seek out the sobriety, or was it the conjunction of like your partner leaving you, losing your job, ending up back at home? Was there like one push that pushed you over the edge to Google sobriety?
It's a good question. I actually don't think it was like one thing. It was like the accumulation of everything, right? We think about like the straw that like broke the camel's back. It was kind of just like every single hit, right? It was the job, and then it was my girlfriend, and then it was like moving back home, and like I bond relationship with friends, like all those like really hurt. And then it was just like I had all of this pain just kind of weighing on me from everything. And that like cumulative pain kind of pushed me over the edge. So like it really wasn't like one specific moment. But what I do remember though, I do remember like one distinct moment that kind of did shock me. Like I just remember just like, being in college one night, and I had like a huge exam the next day. And I remember just going out on an absolute bender, and like I didn't remember one thing. And I remember waking up the next morning, looking at my alarm clock and realizing that my exam started 2 hours ago. And here I was in bed with puke like all over the floor and everything like that too.
Whoa.
And I was just like, and in my head, like I didn't really subconsciously, I was like, dude, like what if that was your job? Like what if that was like picking up your kid from school? Like that, like subconsciously was going through my head. And at the time I was like, I'll change, like it'll be good. But like that almost, like I thought about that so much. And like that kind of kept replaying in my mind. Like when I would, start to question the things that I would do, it's like, wow, like this stuff is, it might be fun in the moment, but dude, it has repercussions that, maybe it was a test that you ended up getting a 0 on, but like, dude, what if that was something even more important than that in the moment? And so that was like a big thing for me where I was like, well, but it was really the cumulative pain that I think, pushed the change for sure.
Wow, man. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay. Last question, and it's a play on your continual last question on your podcast, but I'm wondering what is something that people can do to find, because I think you've done an incredible job of finding your passion and integrating it into your life. But it does sound like there was a journey to find that. What is one tip or one thing that people can do to find that thing that gets them fired up? Because it doesn't have to be ultra running. It can be anything. What's something, how did you decide to finally search for that?
Yeah, dude, man. And I love this question. Thank you for asking this. Cause I struggle with this at a very young age. And, I think a lot of people like young kind of struggle with that just because we have this like societal pressure to like have things figured out. Like by the time you go to college, pick the major, all that kind of stuff. And I went through kind of like an existential crisis, even like that kind of, maybe that actually kind of could have led to this too. But I was like, what the heck am I going to be here for? And, a mentor did tell me this one thing that I thought was very, very insightful. He was like, dude, like finding your passion is actually a lie. Like finding is a lie. You have to build your passion. But the only way that you can build a passion is if you try a bunch of cool stuff out there and find something that starts as a small interest. So like for me, dude, when I started running, again, none of this, like I didn't expect like ultra running to be the thing that I did in my life. Like I was just like, I'm going to try it out. And I found that I liked it. And that started as like a really like small like. And then through the years, I started to dive into it more. I started to do it more. I started to talk about it more. I started to learn about it more. The more that you like feed your brain with that activity or thing that you like to do, the more your interest starts to grow, the more your brain starts to wire around thinking about those things. So you literally feed that interest. Then you start hanging out with people who like running. You start to like watch running documentaries. You start to watch Unbreakable. Like you start to like do all these things. And it's literally like leaning into that thing as much as possible. And then you get this passion that's built because you literally just keep feeding yourself it. So really like passion and finding your purpose in life starts with like a budding interest. and then just expanding it out into something bigger by keep going into it too. Now for ultra running, I think it's very similar because a lot of people are like, I don't know if I like mountainous races or fixed time races or like whatever. I'm like, dude, try it all. And like, if you have like a budding interest on that, like, you know, you can find it. And hey, even if you don't like it, great. Now you know that you're never going to do that freaking race again. So like, all that being said, it's like, it's having the joy of just trying to find so many, like try out so many different things, identify the things that have a little bit more interest than the others. And if you want it to be this thing that you want to like go all in on or be super passionate about, like fan those flames, like dive into it, start to learn. Like you almost have to like condition your brain to really like that until it comes into this like budding passion. Like, cause again, like my plan was never to get into ultra running as my job or anything like that. It was literally just, I thought it was cool. I want to try it out and, you know, fan the flames on there. So like finding your passions lie, build your passion, but it starts with trying out a bunch of things, seeing what you like or you don't like. And listen, you know, if you're 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, it doesn't matter. Like, you know, we hear it all the time. Like, you know, I think Colonel Sanders started KFC when he was like 60 something years old. Like there's always time. There's always time to find the thing. And so just keep trying stuff, keep being that kid, keep like being curious about it. And when you find that thing, fan the flames and you'll find that thing that you were meant to do on this earth.
Yeah, let's update that because Ludo won Hard Rock at 49. Yes. So we can say Ludo won Hard Rock at 49. But on that note, I always like to say, yeah, exactly. I always like to say, get to yes or no, whether it's dating or a hobby or a passion or a goal or like something you think you want to do. Decide if you want to do it or not. And if you get a yes or no, that's awesome because like if you're going on first dates with someone and it's in the maybe, you just want to get a yes or no. You want to decide if you're going to invest in this thing or not. So that's really the goal.
Well, all right. One question to you, Jeff, if you don't mind. Yeah. Like for you, like what about you? Because I know you had, you know, career and you have a pretty like lucrative career. Like everything was kind of successful on paper, but then you decided to branch out from that and basically do what you kind of did now. So how did you kind of approach that? I'm curious here on your end.
Yeah. I mean, I knew my passion was the outdoors. I just never. Let's see. I wanted to find a way to make that my life. I just never had a strong enough motivation, I think, or like that push, or maybe just that ability to embrace the fear of the unknown, which is weird because I feel like in most other realms I have. And then just one day I was driving home and like there was like a gun store on the side and was like, man, if I keep doing this, I'm just going to be pulling over there and getting a gun and killing myself. And it was like, I need to make a change. I put in like a month notice or something and then did the Great Western Loop a month from then and then never looked back. So it did just take this like pretty big realization of, man, I am not headed to a good spot. It's probably sooner than later if I keep doing this that I'm going to be making decisions I don't need to make. And so it was like, I let myself live with the worst case scenario is not as bad as what it would have been if I kept making more money. So I just stuck to that and carried me through to present day, I guess.
Oh man, super inspirational, man. Thanks for sharing that, dude. And like, I will say, man, like, you know, a lot of the stuff that I say, a lot of the stuff that I do, like I do credit it to a lot of the people I, you know, associate with, like both directly and indirectly, man. And you've played a massive role in, you know, the way that I carry myself in ultra running and, you know, the things I aspire to do, man. It's stories like that just, you know, get me stoked to continue to know you and just know you're inspiring a ton of people, including myself out there.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I think you should sign us off to end every episode. We say, stay elite, my friends. So send us off, Joe.
All right. Well, in the words of the great Jeff Garmeyer, stay elite, my friends. And we'll both be at Javelina. So it's, what's your costume this year? Is that top secret?
I'm not sure yet. I got 2 more races before Javelina to mull it over in the overnight sections.
Just wear a costume at Wasatch and as a test run.
That's a really good idea. I need to come up with one real quick.
That'd be great. Well, stay elite, my friends. Thank you for listening.